In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a renowned painter is found drowned in his studio's fountain, his brushes scattered, a sketchbook torn. Was it his resentful wife, his enigmatic model, his prideful patron, or his loyal assistant who ended his life? As whispers of scandal ripple through the lanes, only Miss Jane Marple, with her keen eyes and quiet wisdom, can unravel the secrets hidden in the shadows of art and ambition, where a single stolen sketch holds the key to a deadly truth. Chapter 1. The studio by the fountain. The village of St. Mary Mead lay nestled in the gentle folds of the English countryside, its thatched cottages and winding lanes a picture of timeless serenity. Yet, on this crisp autumn morning, a shadow had fallen over its tranquility. Julian Haverford, the celebrated painter whose portraits graced the galleries of London, had been found dead in the ornamental fountain of his studio, a converted barn perched on the village's edge. His body, discovered at dawn by a delivery boy, lay face down in the shallow water, his silver hair fanned out like a halo. Paintbrushes scattered across the stone floor as though flung by a careless hand. Miss Jane Marple, seated by the window of her neat cottage, her knitting needles clicking softly, heard the news from her maid, Lily, who bustled in with a tray of tea and a face flushed with excitement. "It's dreadful, miss," she said, setting the tray down with a clatter. "Mr. Haverford drowned in his own fountain. The milkman says its murder police are crawling all over the place." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild blue eyes sharpening behind her spectacles. "Murder, Lily?" she asked, her voice gentle but laced with curiosity. "That's a strong word for St. Mary Mead." "Oh, yes, miss," Lily replied, eager to spill the gossip. "They say he was held under deliberate-like. Water in his lungs and marks on his neck, the milkman heard from the constable's wife. Terrible, it is." She shivered, more from thrill than horror, and retreated to the kitchen. Miss Marple leaned back in her armchair, her knitting resting in her lap. Murder in St. Mary Mead was rare, but not unheard of. She had seen human nature's darker shades even in this quiet corner. Julian Haverford, she recalled, was no ordinary man. She had glimpsed him once at the village fete, a striking figure with a mane of silver hair and eyes that burned with an artist's fervour. His portraits, vivid and almost unsettlingly lifelike, were the talk of the county, fetching sums that made the vicar's eyebrows rise. His studio, a barn transformed with a glass roof and that curious fountain, was his sanctuary, funded by a wealthy patron who, she wondered, would dare to extinguish such a light. Her thoughts were interrupted by the crunch of gravel outside. Inspector Craddock, his face etched with the strain of a case already thorny, stepped through her gate. Miss Marple welcomed him with her usual courtesy, offering tea and a seat by the fire. "You've heard, I suppose," he said, declining the tea with a wave. "Haverford's death is no accident. The coroner's certain bruises on his neck. Signs of a struggle. We're treating it as murder." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene but her mind racing. "A dreadful business, Inspector. Have you any suspects?" "For, so far," Craddock said, settling into the chintz armchair. "His wife, Clara Haverford. His model, Elise Vane. His patron, Lord Reginald Ashby. And his assistant, Thomas Reed. All were near the studio last evening, and none have a solid alibi." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Miss Marple noted as a sign of his frustration. The studio door was unlocked, and the fountain's shallow hardly a place for an accidental drowning. "Indeed," Miss Marple murmured, her needles resuming their rhythm. A fountain is an odd choice for murder, don't you think? So public, yet so intimate. She paused, her mind drifting to a long-ago incident in the village, when a farmer's wife had pushed her rival into a duck pond in a fit of jealousy. No one had died, but the impulse was the same, sudden, desperate, personal. "Tell me about these suspects, Inspector," she said. Craddock obliged, his voice brisk. Clara was a quiet woman, married to Haverford for 20 years, her life eclipsed by his brilliance. Whispers of his flirtations with models had strained their marriage. Elise Vane, the current muse, was a beauty whose face adorned Haverford's latest series, her presence in the studio a source of village gossip. Lord Ashby, a collector of Haverford's work, had funded the studio but quarrelled over delayed commissions. Thomas Reed, the assistant, was a nervous lad who mixed paints and cleaned brushes. His devotion to Haverford bordering on worship. Miss Marple listened, her mind sorting each detail like threads in a tapestry. "And the time of death?" she asked. "Between 7 and 10 last night," Craddock replied, the doctors narrowing it down. Whoever did it was strong enough to hold him under, but it wasn't a prolonged struggle. The scenes are mess brushes, everywhere, a canvas. Knocked over, Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest. "A canvas knocked over," she repeated softly, as if someone left in a hurry. She thought of Mrs. Eldridge, a St. Mary Mead widow who once overturned a table in a panic after breaking a neighbour's prized vase. Haste, she knew, often betrayed guilt. "I should like to see the studio, Inspector, if I may," she said. Craddock smiled, accustomed to her quiet insistence. "I thought you might tomorrow morning, then. But Miss Marple, this one feels tangled." Haverford was a man who stirred passions, love, envy, greed. Any one of them could have done it. As he left, Miss Marple gazed out her window, the autumn leaves drifting like unanswered questions. Julian Haverford's death was no random act. It was a stroke of malice, deliberate as a brushstroke on his canvas. She thought of the fountain, its gentle gurgle masking a violent end, and her fingers tightened on her knitting. Somewhere in St. Mary Mead, she knew, a killer was hiding, their secret as fragile as the villagers' peace. Chapter 2. The Cast of Shadows. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cosy drawing-room, the fire crackling softly in the grate, casting a warm glow over the chintz curtains and the polished mahogany of her tea-table. Outside, the autumn wind whispered through. St. Mary Mead, carrying the faint chill of evening and the weight of the village's latest scandal. The death of Julian Haverford, found drowned in his studio's fountain, had stirred the quiet lanes into a hum of speculation. Miss Marple's knitting lay idle in her lap, her needles stilled by the arrival of Inspector Craddock, who stood now by the mantelpiece, his face drawn with the burden of a case that promised no easy answers. "You've a way with these matters," Miss Marple, Craddock began, his tone a blend of respect and exasperation. "I've seen you unravel knots that would baffle Scotland Yard. Haverford's death is murder, no question. The coroner's report confirms it water in his lungs, but bruises on his neck and shoulders, as if he were held under with force. The studio's a mess, paintbrushes scattered, a canvas toppled. Whoever did it acted in haste, but with intent." Miss Marple's blue eyes, sharp despite their mildness, met his. "A dreadful affair, Inspector. You mentioned suspects yesterday. 4, I believe." Her voice was gentle, but there was a precision to her words, like the careful stitches in the scarf she had set aside. Craddock nodded, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. "Yes, 4. Clara Haverford, his wife, Elise Vane, his model, Lord Reginald Ashby, his patron, and Thomas Reed, his assistant. Each had access to the studio last evening, and none can fully account for their movements between 7 and 10. When Haverford died, he flipped open the notebook, though he scarcely needed to consult it. The studio door was unlocked, as it often was when Haverford worked late. The fountains shallow, barely 2 feet deep, but enough to drown a man if he's held down. Miss Marple tilted her head, her mind already sifting through the possibilities. A fountain is such an curious place for murder, she mused. So exposed, yet so personal. It suggests a moment of passion, don't you think? Or perhaps desperation. She paused, her thoughts drifting to a long-ago incident in St. Mary Mead, when a jealous housemaid had pushed a rival into the village pond over a stolen sweetheart. No one had died, but the act had been impulsive, born of a sudden flare of emotion. "Tell me about these suspects, Inspector," she said, folding her hands. "In detail, if you please." Craddock settled into the armchair opposite the firelight, catching the lines of fatigue on his face. "Clara Haverford first," he began. "She's 45, married to Julian for 20 years. A quiet woman, almost faded, you might say. She's lived in his shadow, managing the household while he painted and charmed his way through society. There's talk in the village that she resented his attentions to his models, Elise Vane in particular. Clara was seen at the studio, around 7, bringing him supper. She claims she left him alive, painting, and returned home. No one saw her after that until morning." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene but her mind alert. "Resentment in a marriage can simmer for years," she observed. "I knew a woman in St. Mary Mead, Mrs. Pritchard, who endured her husband's wandering eye for decades without a word. But when she found a letter from his mistress, she smashed every dish in the house. Clara Haverford strikes me as quieter, but silence can hide a storm. What of Elise Vane?" Craddock's jaw tightened. "Elise is 28, a beauty with auburn hair and a way of drawing every eye in a room. She's been Haverford's model for his latest series, The Muses, which has collectors clamoring. She was at the studio until 8, posing for sketches. She says Haverford was alive when she left, absorbed in his work. But there's something about her too polished, too careful in her answers. The village gossips say she and Haverford were closer than they should have been, though she denies it." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "A model's life depends on her charm, doesn't it? I recall a young actress in my youth, quite lovely, who used her allure to secure roles. But when a director crossed her, she stole his script and sold it to a rival. Beauty can mask ambition, Inspector." "Did Elise have reason to quarrel with Haverford?" "Possibly," Craddock said. "She's ambitious, and Haverford's paintings made her famous. But fame doesn't always mean wealth. We're looking into her finances. She's been seen with expensive dresses, yet her background suggests modest means." He turned a page in his notebook. "Then there's Lord Reginald Ashby, Haverford's patron. He's 60, a widower, owns half the county. He funded the studio's conversion, expecting Haverford to produce portraits for his collection. They argued recently. Ashby claims Haverford was late on commissions, costing him money. He visited the studio at 6 to discuss a new painting. Left by 6:30, he says. His groundskeeper confirms it, but I'm not convinced." Miss Marple's needles, though still, seemed to quiver with her thoughts. "A man like Lord Ashby values control," she said. "I knew a squire once, much like him, who funded a village hall but expected every event to bend to his will. When a young curate defied him, he withdrew his support in a fury. Pride can be a dangerous thing, Inspector. And the assistant, Thomas Reed. Craddock sighed. Thomas is 22, a nervous sort, all elbows and apologies. He's been with Haverford 2 years, mixing paints, cleaning brushes, learning the trade. He worships Haverford, calls him a genius. He was at the studio until 9, tidying up. Says he left Haverford alive, but he's jumpy, avoids my eyes when I press him. I think he's hiding something, though whether it's murder or something smaller, I can't say. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her gaze distant. A young man devoted to his master can be blinded by loyalty. I remember a gardener's boy in the village, so devoted to old Colonel Bantry that he lied to cover a theft of apples, thinking it protected his employer's honor. Thomas may know more than he says, but not necessarily about murder. She paused, her mind turning to the studio itself. You mentioned a canvas toppled, Inspector. Anything else out of place? Craddock's brow furrowed. Yes, now you mention it. A sketchbook was found near the fountain, pages damp but intact. Some sketches of Elise, beautifully done, but one page was torn out, as if someone ripped it in a hurry, and there were scratches. On the fountain's edge marble, you know, so they stood out. Could be from Haverford's struggle, or something else. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. A torn sketchbook is interesting, isn't it? Sketches by a man like Haverford would be valuable. I recall a seamstress in St. Mary Mead who stole a dress pattern to sell to a rival shop. The theft was small, but the shame was great when she was caught. Perhaps someone took a sketch, and Haverford discovered it. She set her knitting aside entirely now, her hands folded neatly. I should very much like to meet these people, Inspector. People reveal themselves in conversation, you know, even when they mean to hide. Craddock smiled, a rare break in his grim demeanor. I knew you'd say that. I've arranged for you to visit the studio tomorrow, and Clara Haverford has agreed to see you, the others. I'll make it happen. But Miss Marple, this case feels like a tangle of motives, jealousy, greed, pride. Haverford was a man who inspired strong feelings, not all of them kind. As he spoke, Miss Marple's mind wandered to the studio, picturing the fountain's gentle ripple, the scattered brushes, the toppled canvas. She imagined Haverford, his silver hair glinting under the studio's glass roof, his hands stained with paint, unaware of the shadow creeping closer. Murder, she knew, was rarely a single act. It was a story woven from threads of human weakness. Clara's quiet resentment, Elise's calculated charm, Ashby's wounded pride. Thomas's fearful loyalty each was a thread, and somewhere among them lay the truth. Craddock rose to leave, buttoning his coat against the evening chill. I'll send a car for you tomorrow, Miss Marple, 9 o'clock. That will do nicely, she replied, her smile as warm as the firelight. And, Inspector, do look into that sketchbook. A missing page is like a missing word in a letter. It changes the meaning entirely. As the door closed behind him, Miss Marple picked up her knitting, her needles resuming their steady rhythm. The village outside was settling into dusk, lamps glowing in cottage windows, but her mind was far from rest. She thought of Haverford's studio, its walls lined with canvases, each a window into his soul. Who had stood by that fountain, their hands forcing his life away? Clara, nursing years of betrayal. Elise, guarding a secret behind her beauty. Ashby, his generosity turned to rage. Or Thomas, his devotion twisted into something darker. She recalled a vicar's wife in St. Mary Mead, who had seen the picture of piety until she was caught forging checks to fund a secret passion for gambling. People, Miss Marple knew, were rarely what they seemed. The studio, with its fountain and its secrets, was a stage, and the players were all hiding something. Her task was to watch, to listen, to find the moment when the mask slipped, the fire crackled, and a log shifted, sending sparks up the chimney. Miss Marple's needles clicked, each stitch a step closer to the truth. Tomorrow she would see the studio, meet the players, and begin to unravel the threads of Julian Haverford's death. For now, she sipped her tea, her mind as clear and sharp as the autumn air, ready to pierce the shadows cast by a murderer's hand. Chapter 3. The Widow's Veil Miss. Jane Marple stepped out of Inspector Craddock's car, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path leading to Haverford House, the Georgian residence, with its ivy-clad walls and tall sash windows, stood in quiet dignity, but the air held a subtle weight, as if the house itself mourned its master. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and a faint mist lingered, curling around the yew hedges like a whisper of secrets. Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her sharp eyes taking in every detail: the untrimmed rose bushes, the curtain twitching in an upstairs window. A house, she knew, could speak as loudly as its occupants. If one listened closely, Clara Haverford had agreed to meet her. A courtesy extended, no doubt, at Craddock's gentle insistence. Miss Marple had met widows before, women draped in grief or its pretense, and she approached this visit with her usual blend of sympathy and scrutiny. Julian Haverford's death, drowned in his studio's fountain, was no accident, and Clara, as his wife, stood at the heart of the tragedy. Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead widow, Mrs. Langley, whose tears had masked a bitter relief when her bullying husband died. Grief, she knew, could be a veil for many things. The door was opened by a maid, a pale girl with nervous hands, who led Miss Marple into a drawing-room of faded elegance. The furniture was fine but worn, the velvet cushions fraying at the edges, and a portrait of Clara, painted in her youth, hung above the fireplace. Its colours were vibrant, capturing a young woman with soft brown eyes and a hopeful smile, a stark contrast to the figure who now entered. Clara Haverford, at 45, was slight, her dark hair streaked with grey, her face etched with lines that spoke of endurance rather than joy. She wore a black dress, simple but well cut, and her hands twisted a lace handkerchief as she greeted her guest. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to come," Clara said, her voice low and steady, though her eyes flickered with unease. "Inspector Craddock said you wished to talk about Julian." The name caught slightly in her throat, and she gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. Would you like tea?" Miss Marple accepted with a smile, settling into a high-backed chair that creaked faintly under her weight. "Thank you, Mrs. Haverford. I'm so sorry for your loss. It must be a terrible shock." Her tone was warm, but her gaze was steady, noting the way Clara's fingers tightened on the handkerchief, the slight tremor in her movements. "It is," Clara replied, sitting opposite, her posture rigid. "Julian was everything to this house. His art, his presence. I still can't believe he's gone." She looked toward the portrait, her eyes lingering on the younger version of herself. "The police say it was no accident. I can't imagine who would do such a thing." Miss Marple nodded, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "It's hard to fathom, isn't it? In a village like St. Mary Mead, we think we know our neighbors, but people can surprise us. She paused, letting the words settle. I understand you were at the studio the evening Julian died. Could you tell me about it? Clara's gaze dropped to her handkerchief, her fingers working it into tight knots. I took him supper at 7, she said. He often worked late, and he'd forget to eat unless I reminded him. The studio was warm, full of light heat, with painting Elise, you know, his model. She was there, posing. A shadow crossed her face, so fleeting Miss Marple might have missed it had she not been watching closely. I left the tray and came home. That was the last I saw of him. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of gentle curiosity. It must be difficult, sharing him with his art. I've heard his models were very much a part of his world. Her words were careful, probing without accusation, like a needle threading through delicate fabric. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. Julian lived for his work, she said. His models, his paintings, they were his passion. I learned, long ago, to accept it. Her voice held a practiced calm, but Miss Marple caught the undercurrent of something sharper resignation, perhaps, or something closer to anger. She thought of Mrs. Carter, a St. Mary Mead wife who had smiled through her husband's affairs until the day she packed his bags and left them on the doorstep. Patience, Miss Marple knew, had its limits. Elise Vane is a striking young woman. I hear, Miss Marple said, her tone conversational. Was she often at the studio? Clara hesitated, her eyes flickering to the portrait again. Yes, often. Julian said she inspired him. His muse's series of repainting was of her. He said she had a face that told stories. Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her, the handkerchief now a crumpled ball. I didn't mind. It was his work. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the nuances of Clara's demeanour. The widow's restraint was admirable, but restraint could hide a multitude of sins or hurts. And after you left the studio, she continued, did you return home directly? It's only that the police are trying to piece together everyone's movements. I came straight back, Clara said quickly. I was here by 7:30, reading in the library. The maid can confirm it. Her words were firm, but Miss Marple noted the slight flush in her cheeks, the way her eyes darted to the door as if expecting interruption. An alibi, she thought, was only as strong as the person who gave it, and maids could be persuaded or mistaken. The tea arrived, brought by the same nervous maid, who set the tray down with a clatter and retreated. Miss Marple poured, her movements deliberate, giving Clara time to compose herself. This portrait of you is lovely, she remarked, glancing at the painting above the fireplace. Julian captured something very special, didn't he? You must have been close in those early years. Clara's face softened, a flicker of nostalgia breaking through her reserve. We were, she said softly. He painted that when we were first married. He said I was his muse. Then her voice caught, and she looked away, toward the window where the mist was beginning to lift. But that was a long time ago. His muses changed, as did he. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over Clara's words. A wife replaced by younger, brighter muses might harbour resentment, but murder required more a spark, a breaking point. She thought of a St. Mary Mead spinster, Miss Harrow, who had once thrown a teapot at a cousin who mocked her loneliness. The act was impulsive, but the hurt had festered for years. Had Clara reached such a point? You must have known Julian better than anyone, Miss Marple said, setting her cup down. Did he have enemies? someone who might have wished him harm. Clara shook her head, her expression weary. Julian could be difficult. He was charming, but he had a temper, especially about his work. He quarrelled with Lord Ashby over money, I know that. And Thomas, his assistant, sometimes bore the brunt of his moods. But enemies, I wouldn't say so. People admired him, even if they didn't always like him. Miss Marple noted the careful choice of words. Clara was protecting her husband's memory, or perhaps guarding her own secrets. And Elise, she asked gently, did she ever cause tension between you? Clara's eyes flashed, a brief spark of something raw before she masked it. She was his model, she said curtly. Nothing more. The denial was too quick, Miss Marple thought, like a door slammed shut to hide what lay behind. She made a mental note to explore Elise Vane further, for a model's role could extend beyond the canvas. The conversation turned to lighter matters, village gossip. The upcoming church, bizarre, but Miss Marple's mind remained on the widow. Clara's composure was a shield, but shields could crack. As she rose to leave, thanking Clara for her hospitality, Miss Marple's eyes fell on a small table by the window. A photograph of Julian stood there, his silver hair catching the light, his smile confident. Beside it was a single rose, wilted but not yet discarded, as if Clara could not bear to let it go. Outside, the mist had cleared, and the sun revealed the neglected garden in stark detail. Miss Marple paused by the gate, her thoughts circling. Back to the studio, the fountain, the scattered brushes. Clara's alibi was plausible, but its edges were frayed, like the handkerchief she clutched. The widow's grief was real, but so was her restraint, and Miss Marple wondered what lay beneath it: love, betrayal, or something colder. As she walked back to the village, her umbrella tapping the ground, Miss Marple felt the familiar stirring of insight. Clara Haverford was no simple widow, mourning in silence. She was a woman who had lived in the shadow of genius, and shadows, Miss Marple knew, could hide dangerous things. The next step was the studio, where the fountain waited, its secrets submerged but not beyond her reach. Chapter 4. The Muses charmed the village tea shop. With its lace curtains and mismatched china, was a hub of St. Mary Mead's gentle gossip. Its tables abuzz with whispers of Julian Haverford's murder. Miss Jane Marple settled at a corner table, her knitting bag tucked beside her, her eyes bright with the quiet alertness that belied her unassuming appearance. She had come to meet Elise Vane, the painter's model, whose face adorned his celebrated Muses series. The village had much to say about Elise: her beauty, her poise, her rumoured closeness to Haverford, and Miss Marple knew that gossip, like a half-finished sketch, often held fragments of truth. Elise arrived precisely at 3, her auburn hair catching the afternoon light like a flame, her green eyes scanning the room with a performer's ease. She wore a tailored coat, its elegance at odds with the tea shop's homely charm, and a silk scarf knotted with practiced care. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice smooth as polished glass. "I'm Elise Vane. Inspector Craddock suggested we might talk." Her smile was warm, but Miss Marple noted its careful calibration, like a portrait painted to please. "Thank you for coming, Miss Vane," Miss Marple said, gesturing to the chair opposite. "It's so kind of you, in such a difficult time. I was a great admirer of Mr. Haverford's work, you know. His paintings of you were quite remarkable." Her tone was gentle, her words chosen to set Elise at ease. But her gaze was steady, searching for the faintest crack in the young woman's composure. Elise inclined her head, accepting the compliment with a modesty that seemed rehearsed. Julian was a genius, she said, her voice tinged with a practiced sadness. It was an honor to pose for him. His Muses series. He said I brought it to life. She paused as the waitress brought tea, her fingers lingering on the cups. Handle, delicate but deliberate. Miss Marple poured the tea, her movements slow and precise. It must have been a demanding role, she said, posing for hours, capturing just the right expression. I imagine you and Mr. Haverford spent a great deal of time together. Her words were light, but they carried a question, one she knew Elise would feel. Oh, yes, Elise replied, her smile unwavering. Hours in the studio, sometimes late into the evening. Julian was tireless when he worked. He'd sketch, paint, sketch again always, chasing perfection. She sipped her tea, her eyes meeting Miss Marple's over the rim of the cup. But it was professional, of course. He was devoted to his art. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of kindly interest. Of course, though I've heard the village say he was quite taken with you. It's natural, I suppose, for an artist to admire his muse. She paused, letting the words hang, recalling a young soprano in St. Mary Mead who had charmed a choirmaster into indiscretions, only to use his affection for her own ends. Beauty, Miss Marple knew, was a tool, and Elise wielded it with skill. Elise's laugh was soft, almost musical. The village loves its stories, she said. Julian admired my face for his canvases, nothing more. Clara, his wife, was always kind to me. She understood his work. Her words were smooth, but Miss Marple caught the faintest tightening of her jaw, the way her fingers brushed the scarf at her throat as if to steady herself. You were at the studio the night he died, I believe, Miss Marple asked, her tone as mild as if she were inquiring about the weather. It must be painful to think of it. Elise's eyes flickered, a shadow passing over them before she regained her poise. Yes, I was there until 8. Julian was sketching me for a new piece in the series. He was in good spirits, full of ideas. I left him at his easel, the fountain, running in the background. She paused, her gaze drifting to the window, where the village green lay quiet under the autumn sun. I went home after that. I live at Rose Cottage, just past the church. I was there by 8:30. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, though her knitting remained in her bag. A short walk, she observed, and no one saw you leave the studio. Her question was gentle, but it carried the weight of scrutiny. Like a light turned on a darkened corner, Elise hesitated, her fingers tightening on her cup. It was dark, she said. The studio's a bit out of the way. I don't recall anyone about. Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple noted the slight flush in her cheeks, the way her eyes avoided direct contact. She thought of a St. Mary Mead seamstress caught pilfering lace, who had spun a similar tale of solitude until a neighbour's testimony unravelled it. The studio sounds a magical place, Miss Marple said, shifting the conversation to keep Elise off balance. All those sketches and paintings. I understand some of Julian's work is quite valuable, even the preliminary drawings. Were you ever tempted to keep one as a memento? Elise's smile faltered, a crack in her polished facade. Oh no, she said quickly. Julian was particular about his sketches. He kept them locked away or gave them to Lord Ashby for his collection. I wouldn't dream of taking one. Her hand moved to her scarf again, adjusting it with a nervous flick, and Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. The gesture was small, but telling, like a villager's twitch when caught in a lie. I see, Miss Marple said, her tone as warm. As ever, it's just that I heard a sketchbook was found near the fountain, with a page torn out. It made me wonder if someone might have borrowed something. She let the words linger, watching Elise's reaction. The model's composure held, but her eyes widened briefly, a flash of alarm quickly masked. "I wouldn't know about that," she said, her voice a shade too bright. Julian had so many sketchbooks. He was always drawing, tearing pages out, starting over. "It's probably nothing." She set her cup down, the china clinking softly against the saucer, and Miss Marple noted the faintest tremble in her hand. They spoke for a while longer, about the village, the weather, the upcoming harvest festival. But Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. Elise Vane was a study in control, her beauty a shield, her words a carefully painted canvas. Yet beneath the surface, Miss Marple sensed unease, a secret guarded as fiercely as Clara Haverford's handkerchief. She recalled a young governess in St. Mary Mead, who had stolen a silver brooch to fund a new life, her charm disarming suspicion until a pawnshop receipt betrayed her. Elise's poise was her strength, but also her vulnerability, and Miss Marple intended to probe further as Elise rose to leave, thanking Miss Marple with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The older woman's gaze fell on the bracelet peeking from beneath Elise's sleeve, delicate silver chain with a small, sharp-edged charm. It was a fleeting detail, but Miss Marple filed it away, thinking of the scratches on the fountain's marble edge. "Do take care, Miss Vane," she said, her voice kind but her eyes keen. "It's a troubling time for us all." Elise nodded, her scarf fluttering as she stepped into the autumn air. Miss Marple watched her go, her figure cutting a striking silhouette against the village green. The tea shop's chatter resumed, but Miss Marple's thoughts were with the studio, the fountain, the torn sketchbook. Elise's story was plausible, her alibi vague but not impossible. Yet her nervousness, her quick deflections, suggested more than a model's grief. Was it guilt, fear, or something else entirely? Miss Marple gathered her knitting bag, leaving a few coins for the tea. As she stepped outside, the village seemed to hold its breath, the quiet lanes hiding secrets as surely as Elise's smile. The model's beauty was her currency, but beauty could buy trouble as easily as fame. Miss Marple's next visit would be to the studio, where the fountain waited, its ripples concealing the truth. For now, she walked slowly home, her umbrella tapping the pavement, her mind weaving the threads of Elise Vane's story into the larger tapestry of Julian Haverford's death. Chapter 5. The Patron's Pride. Miss Jane Marple's journey to Lord Reginald Ashby's manor took her through the winding lanes of St. Mary Mead, past fields golden with late autumn wheat and hedgerows heavy with blackberries. The manor, Ashby Hall, stood atop a gentle rise, its stone facade imposing yet weathered, like a grand old gentleman past his prime. Its tall chimneys pierced the crisp morning sky, and the windows gleamed with a cold, unwelcoming light. Miss Marple, clutching her umbrella as a shield against the breeze, felt the weight of the place, its history, its wealth, its secrets. Lord Ashby, Julian Haverford's patron, was a man of influence, and influence, she knew, often bred arrogance, which could curdle into something far darker. Inspector Craddock had arranged the visit, his voice on the telephone tinged with a mix of deference and suspicion. "Ashby's a big name in the county," he'd said. "Funds half the village's projects, but he's not one to cross. He admits to being at the studio the evening Haverford died, but his story's shaky. I'd value your take, Miss Marple." She had agreed, of course, her curiosity piqued by the thought of a man whose pride might have led him to murder. The heavy oak door was opened by a butler, a stooped figure with a face as impassive as the manor's stonework. He led her through a marble-floored hall, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors and a towering grandfather clock that ticked like a heartbeat. The drawing room was vast, its walls lined with Julian Haverford's paintings, vivid landscapes, and haunting portraits that seemed to watch her as she entered. Lord Ashby stood by a roaring fire, a stout man of 60 with a florid complexion and a moustache that bristled with authority. His tweed suit was immaculate, but his eyes, small and sharp, betrayed a flicker of unease. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice booming with forced cordiality. "A pleasure, though I confess I'm puzzled by your visit. Craddock says you're assisting with this unfortunate business about Haverford." He gestured to a plush armchair, its crimson upholstery gleaming in the firelight. "Please, sit, Sherry." Miss Marple declined with a smile, settling into the chair with her knitting bag at her side. "Thank you, Lord Ashby, but I'm quite content. It's kind of you to see me on such short notice. Julian Haverford's death has shaken the village, and I'm trying to understand what happened. His paintings, I see, are a treasure." Her eyes swept the room, lingering on a half-finished portrait of a woman in a golden gown, her face incomplete but unmistakably regal. Ashby's chest puffed slightly, his pride evident. Haverford was a genius, no question. "I funded his studio. Turned that old barn into a proper workspace. Cost me a pretty penny, but his work was worth it. Collectors from London to Paris clamoured for his canvases." He paused, his hand tightening on the silver head of his walking stick. A pity he was so unreliable. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of gentle curiosity. "Unreliable? That surprises me, for an artist of his stature. Was there trouble between you?" Her tone was light, but her question was a probe, carefully aimed to elicit more than Ashby might intend. He snorted, a sound of exasperation. "Trouble? The man was impossible. I commissioned 3 portraits for my collection. Important pieces, mind you, for a gala next spring. He promised delivery by Christmas, but he kept delaying, always chasing some new idea with that model of his, Elise Vane." His voice dripped with disdain at the mention of Elise, and Miss Marple noted the way his moustache twitched, as if the name itself offended him. "I went to the studio that evening to press him on it. 6 o'clock, sharp. Found him mooning over her, sketching like a lovesick boy." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened behind her spectacles. "You were there at 6, you say? And how did Mr. Haverford seem?" She thought of a St. Mary Mead squire, Mr. Grayson, whose temper had flared when a tenant farmer ignored his orders. Pride, she knew, could turn a disagreement into a vendetta. "Distracted," Ashby said, his tone curt. "Barely gave me the time of day. Said he'd finish my portraits when he was ready, not a moment sooner. Arrogant, that's what he was. I left by 6:30, told him to get on with it, or I'd reconsider my support." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "But I didn't kill him, if that's what you're thinking. I was back here by 7, as my wife will tell you." Miss Marple nodded, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Of course," Lord Ashby wrinkles in his brow like a ledger with hidden debts. "And you saw nothing unusual at the studio? No one else about?" Ashby hesitated, his fingers drumming on the arm of his chair. "Just Elise, posing as usual. And that assistant, Thomas Reed, lurking in the background, mixing paints. The place was a mess, brushes everywhere, canvases propped against walls. Haverford never kept it tidy. He shook his head, as if the disorder offended him as much as the delays. I didn't stay long. Had better things to do. Miss Marple's mind turned to the studio, picturing the scene, Haverford at his easel, Elise in a pose of studied grace, Thomas in the shadows, and Ashby, his pride wounded by an artist who dared defy him. She recalled a St. Mary Mead churchwarden, Mr. Hobbs, who had once threatened to cut the vicar's stipend over a sermon he deemed too progressive. Men like Ashby, she thought, did not take slights lightly. Those paintings must be very valuable, she said, her voice soft. I understand even Haverford's sketches fetch high prices. Did you ever collect those? Ashby's eyes flickered, a momentary pause before he answered. Sketches, occasionally. He gave me a few as tokens of appreciation, but they're not my focus. I prefer the finished works. He gestured to the portrait on the wall, its golden hues glowing in the firelight. That one's worth a fortune, though it's not done. Haverford's death has driven up his prices, you know. Tragic, but good for business. Miss Marple, lips pursed slightly, a gesture so subtle it might have gone unnoticed. Greed, she knew, could wear many masks: pride, ambition, even grief. She thought of a St. Mary Mead shopkeeper who had inflated prices after a flood, claiming it was merely business. It's curious, isn't it, she said, how a man's death can turn his work into gold. I heard a sketchbook was found near the fountain with a page missing. Do you suppose someone might have taken it? Ashby's face darkened, his moustache bristling. Thieves. Probably Haverford was careless with his things. Anyone could have wandered in. That studio door was never locked. His tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple caught the slight shift in his posture, the way his hand tightened on his walking stick. He was hiding something, she thought, or perhaps he simply disliked the implication that his patronage had failed to secure Haverford's loyalty. They spoke a little longer, about the manor's gardens, the village's winter fair, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. Ashby's pride was a towering thing, as solid as the manor's walls, but pride could crack under pressure. His visit to the studio, his quarrel with Haverford, his vague alibi were threads in the tapestry of the murder, and she sensed a snag somewhere in his story. As she rose to leave, thanking him for his time, her eyes fell on a small table by the window, where a single sketch lay framed, a study of a horse, signed by Haverford. It was a minor work, but its presence in Ashby's home suggested a deeper interest in the artist's lesser pieces. Outside, the air was sharp, the sky a pale blue streaked with clouds. Miss Marple paused by the manor's gates, her umbrella tapping the ground as she considered Lord Ashby. His wealth and status gave him power, but power could breed entitlement, and entitlement could lead to rage when defied. She thought of the scratches on the fountain's edge, the torn sketchbook, the scattered brushes. Had Ashby's temper flared, turning a heated argument into a fatal struggle? Or was his role merely that of a man whose pride had been pricked, leaving him bitter, but innocent? As she walked back to the village, the manor's shadow stretching long behind her, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the next thread in the mystery. Thomas Reed, the assistant whose nervous devotion might hide more than loyalty. The studio awaited, its fountain a silent witness to the truth, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover it, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 6. The assistant's burden. The converted barn that served as Julian Haverford's studio stood on the outskirts of St. Mary Mead, its weathered timbers softened by the morning light filtering through the autumn mist. The glass roof gleamed like a polished lens, and the ornamental fountain, now silent, glistened with dew. Miss Jane Marple approached the studio with a measured step, her umbrella tapping the gravel path, her eyes scanning the scene with the quiet precision of a gardener, inspecting a rosebed for blight. The studio, she knew, was more than a place of art. It was the stage of a murder, and every brushstroke, every shadow, held a clue to the truth. Inspector Craddock had sent word that Thomas Reed, Haverford's assistant, would be there, sorting through the late painter's tools. Thomas, the nervous youth who mixed paints and cleaned brushes, was the least imposing of the suspects, yet Miss Marple knew that the quietest souls could harbour the deepest secrets. She recalled a St. Mary Mead errand boy, young Timmy Cole, who had seemed meek as a mouse until he was caught smuggling stolen silverware for a local rogue. Loyalty, she thought, could be a mask for guilt as easily as for devotion. The studio door creaked open under her touch, revealing a cavernous space filled with the sharp scent of turpentine and linseed oil. Easels stood like sentinels, some draped with cloths, others bearing half-finished canvases that seemed to pulse with Haverford's lost genius. The fountain, a shallow marble basin fed by a hidden spring, dominated the centre of the room, its surface still and accusing. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on it, noting the faint scratches on its edge, the scattered paintbrushes nearby, their bristles stiff with dried pigment. The scene was chaotic, yet deliberate, as if the killer had fled in haste but left a story. Behind, Thomas Reed was at the far end of the studio, crouched over a wooden crate, his thin frame hunched as he sorted brushes with trembling hands. He was a gangly lad of 22, with straw-coloured hair and eyes that darted like a startled deer's at the sound of Miss Marple's footsteps. He started, dropping a brush that clattered against the stone floor. "Oh, Miss Marple, is it?" he stammered, scrambling to his feet. "Inspector Craddock said you'd come. I am just tidying up, you know, for Mr. Haverford's things." Miss Marple smiled, her expression as warm as a fireside. "How kind of you to keep things in order, Mr. Reed," she said, settling onto a wooden stool near the fountain. "It must be difficult working here after such a tragedy." Her voice was gentle, but her gaze was steady. Noting the sweat on Thomas's brow, the way his fingers fumbled with a rag as he wiped his hands. "It is," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Haverford was everything. To me, taught me how to mix colours, how to stretch a canvas, said I had potential." His eyes flickered to an easel in the corner, where a small sketch of his own clumsy landscape leaned against a pile of rags. "I can't believe he's gone." Miss Marple nodded, her hands folded in her lap, her knitting bag resting at her feet. "He sounds like a remarkable man," she said. "And you were with him the night he died, I understand. It must be painful to recall." Her words were a soft invitation, but they carried the weight of inquiry, like a net cast gently over a stream. Thomas swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I was here until 9, he said, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Cleaning up, mostly. Mr. Haverford was working on a sketch of Miss Vane. She left around 8, and I stayed too tidy. He was alive when I left, I swear it." His voice cracked, and he clutched the rag tighter, as if it could anchor him. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was sharp, sifting through his words. "You must have been very devoted to him," she said. "It's rare to find such loyalty in a young man. I knew a gardener's boy once, in St. Mary Mead, who worshipped his employer. He'd do anything to protect him, even lie about a broken window to save him from blame." She paused, watching Thomas's reaction. Did you ever feel that way about Mr. Haverford? Thomas's face flushed, and he looked away toward the fountain. I'd never lie for him, he said quickly, too quickly. I mean, I respected him, but I didn't. I wouldn't. He trailed off, his hands twisting the rag into knots. Miss Marple noted the panic in his eyes, the way his shoulders hunched as if shielding something fragile. It's all right, Mr. Reed, she said, her tone soothing. I only mean that loyalty can make us do things we don't expect. You were here late, you say. Did you see anyone else? Mrs. Haverford, perhaps, or Lord Ashby? She leaned forward slightly, her gaze as gentle as a grandmother's but as piercing as a needle. Thomas shook his head, his voice unsteady. Mrs. Haverford came at 7 with supper, but she didn't stay long. Lord Ashby was here earlier, around 6, but he left before I did. I didn't see anyone else. His eyes darted to a corner of the studio where a stack of sketchbooks lay on a cluttered table, and Miss Marple followed his glance. Her interest piqued. Those sketchbooks, she said, rising and moving toward the table with a deceptive air of casual curiosity. Mr. Haverford's work, I presume. They must be very precious. She lifted one, its leather cover worn but sturdy, and flipped through its pages. The sketches were exquisite studies of Elise Vane, her face captured in fleeting expressions of joy, sorrow, mystery. One page, near the middle, was torn, its jagged edge stark against the careful drawings. Oh dear, Miss Marple said, her voice mild. A page missing. How careless. Thomas's face paled, and he stepped forward, his hands outstretched, as if to snatch the book away. That's Mr. Haverford was always tearing pages out, he said, his words tumbling over each other. He'd sketch something, then decide it wasn't good enough. It's nothing unusual. But his eyes betrayed him, wide and fearful, and Miss Marple saw the truth in them as clearly as if he'd confessed. I see, she said, closing the sketchbook and setting it down with care. It's just that the police mentioned a missing page, and with Mr. Haverford's sketches being so valuable. She let the sentence hang, watching Thomas's reaction. He shifted his weight, his gaze flickering to the fountain, then back to the floor, as if the marble basin held answers he dared not face. I don't know anything about it, he said, his voice barely audible. I just cleaned up, like always. I didn't see anything, but his hands were trembling now, the rag twisted into a tight coil, and Miss Marple thought of a St. Mary Mead choy-boy who had hidden a stolen hymn book under his mattress, his guilt written in every nervous glance. She changed tack, her voice warm and disarming. You must have learned so much from Mr. Haverford, she said. Your own sketch over there, it shows promise. Did he encourage you to pursue your art? Her question was a kindness, but also a probe designed to ease Thomas into revealing more than he intended. His face softened, a flicker of pride breaking through his fear. He did, he said. Said I had an eye for color, if I worked at it. He let me use his supplies sometimes. When he wasn't busy, he gestured to the easel in the corner, his voice gaining strength. That's mine, not like his, but he said it wasn't bad. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes following his gesture. It's very good, Mr. Reed. You must have spent many hours here, watching him work. Did you ever notice anything unusual? Arguments, perhaps, or visitors who seemed out of place? She kept her tone light, but her question was a net, cast to catch any stray detail. Thomas hesitated, his eyes darting to the sketchbooks again. Mr. Haverford argued with Lord Ashby sometimes, he admitted, about money, mostly, and Miss Vain, she could be demanding. Wanted more sittings, more attention. But nothing serious, not like... He stopped, his words cut off as if he'd said too much. Not like murder, Miss Marple finished gently, her gaze unwavering. Thomas flinched, his face a mask of misery, and she knew she had touched a nerve. "You needn't worry, Mr. Reed," she said. "The truth always comes out in its own time. If you know something, it's better to share it now." But Thomas shook his head, his voice a whisper. "I don't know anything. I swear I left him alive." His eyes were pleading, but Miss Marple saw the shadow of doubt in them, the weight of a secret he carried like a stone. She rose, smoothing her skirt, her expression as serene as ever. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. You've been very helpful. I'll let you get back to your work." She paused by the fountain, her fingers brushing its marble edge, feeling the faint scratches under her touch. "Such a lovely fountain," she murmured. A pity it's seen such sorrow. As she left the studio, the mist had lifted, revealing the fields beyond in sharp clarity. Miss Marple's mind was a whirl of impressions. Thomas's trembling hands, his furtive glances, the torn sketchbook. He was hiding something, she was certain, but whether it was murder or a lesser sin, she could not yet say. She thought of the fountain, its shallow water a silent witness to Haverford's final moments, and the scratches that suggested a struggle law, something else. Thomas's loyalty was his burden, but burdens, she knew, could break even the strongest. Heart, her next step would be to revisit the sketchbook, perhaps with Craddock's help, and to probe deeper into Elise Vane's role. For now, Miss Marple walked back to the village, her umbrella a steady rhythm against the path, her thoughts weaving the threads of Thomas Reed's fear into the ever-growing tapestry of Julian Haverford's murder. Chapter 7. The fountain's secret. The autumn sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the fields as Miss Jane Marple made her way back to Julian Haverford's studio. The converted barn loomed against the horizon, its glass roof catching the light like a beacon, yet the air around it felt heavy, as if the building itself bore the weight of the painter's death. Miss Marple's umbrella tapped a steady rhythm on the gravel path, her steps unhurried but purposeful. The studio, she knew, was the heart of this mystery, its fountain the silent witness to a murder that had shattered the village's peace. Today, she intended to listen to its whispers. Inspector Craddock had granted her access, his voice on the telephone tinged with a mix of trust and curiosity. "You'll find it as we left it, Miss Marple," he'd said. "The constables have cordoned off the fountain, but you're free to look around. Just don't touch anything." She had smiled at that, assuring him of her discretion, though her mind was already fixed on the details he'd mentioned: the scattered brushes, the toppled canvas, the torn sketchbook. Each was a thread in the tapestry of Julian Haverford's death, and Miss Marple was determined to trace them to their source. The studio door, heavy and weathered, creaked as she pushed it open, releasing a faint scent of turpentine and damp stone. The vast space was quieter now, the absence of Haverford's presence palpable, like a melody cut short. Easels stood in disarray, their canvases draped or bare, and the fountain shallow, marble, and deceptively serene dominated the room's center. Its water was still, the pump turned off by the police, but Miss Marple could imagine its gentle gurgle, a sound that must have masked the struggle that ended a man's life. She moved slowly, her eyes sweeping the scene with the precision of a seamstress inspecting a hem. The fountain's edge was smooth, save for those faint scratches Craddock had noted, irregular marks that spoke of force or haste. Nearby, a cluster of paintbrushes lay scattered across the floor, their bristles crusted with colors vermilion, ultramarine, ochre, as if flung in a moment of chaos. A canvas lay face down, its wooden frame splintered at one corner, and Miss Marple knelt carefully, her knees protesting, to examine it. The painting was of Elise Vane, her face half formed in bold strokes, her eyes staring out with an intensity that seemed to follow Miss Marple's movements. "Poor man," she murmured, straightening up. "You were interrupted, weren't you?" She thought of a St. Mary Mead carpenter, old Mr. Jenkins, whose workshop had been left in disarray after a thief broke in, tools scattered like leaves. The chaos here was similar, but deliberate, as if the killer had sought to obscure their actions. Her gaze returned to the fountain, its marble gleaming faintly in the light streaming through the glass roof. The scratches intrigued her too, precise for mere accident, too shallow for a weapon. A bracelet, perhaps. She filed the thought away, recalling Elise Vane's silver charm from their tea-shop meeting. Near the fountain stood a small table, clattered, with jars of pigment and rags stiff with paint. Among them was the sketchbook Craddock had mentioned, its leather cover worn but intact. Miss Marple approached it with care, her gloved hands lifting it as if it were a relic. The pages were filled with Haverford's genius quick fluid sketches of Elise, capturing her in moments of laughter, contemplation, defiance. Each was signed with his distinctive flourish, a mark of pride in his craft. But one page, near the center, was torn, its jagged edge stark against the careful drawings. She ran her finger along the tear, her mind racing. Why take just one, she mused aloud, and why leave the rest? She thought of a St. Mary Mead seamstress, Miss Pollitt, who had once stolen a single pattern from a rival's book, believing it would fetch a high price. The theft had been impulsive, driven by desperation, and Miss Marple wondered if a similar motive lay behind this missing page. Haverford's sketches were valuable. Craddock had said collectors paid dearly for even his rough drafts. Had someone taken it to sell, only to be caught by the painter himself? The thought led her back to the suspects. Clara's quiet resentment, Elisa's polished ambition, Ashby's wounded pride, Thomas's nervous loyalty. Each could have been tempted by the sketch's value, but who had the strength and the desperation to kill? Miss Marple set the sketchbook down, her eyes drifting to the floor around the fountain. A faint smudge caught her attention, a streak of blue paint barely visible against the stone. She bent closer, her umbrella propped against the table, and saw that it led toward the door, fading into nothingness. A hurried exit, she murmured, picturing the killer's retreat, their hands perhaps stained with paint or water. She recalled a St. Mary Mead poacher, caught because he'd left muddy footprints leading from a stolen pheasant's roost. Small details, she knew, could unravel the grandest schemes. She moved to the easels, lifting the cloths that covered some of the canvases. Each revealed Elise Vane, her face rendered in vibrant oils, her presence dominating the room even in death's shadow. One painting, unfinished, showed her in a flowing gown, her hair a cascade of auburn light. Miss Marple paused, struck by the intimacy of the work, the way Haverford had captured not just Elise's beauty, but something deeper, a spark of defiance or secrecy. "You were his muse," she said softly, "but were you his downfall?" Her thoughts were interrupted by the creak of the door. Inspector Craddock stepped inside, his coat dusted with morning dew, his face etched with the strain of a case growing more complex by the hour. "Miss Marple," he said, nodding, "found anything interesting?" She turned, her smile serene but her eyes alight with purpose. "A great deal, Inspector," she said. "This studio is a story in itself. The fountain, the brushes, the torn sketchbook, they all speak if you listen. I'm particularly curious about that missing page. It's not just a sketch, I think, but a motive." She gestured to the fountain, her voice steady. "And these scratches, small but telling, they suggest a struggle, but also something more. Personal, a piece of jewelry, perhaps, caught on the marble." Craddock's brow furrowed, and he stepped closer to the fountain, examining the marks with renewed interest. "Jewelry, that's a new angle. Elise Vane wears a bracelet, doesn't she? Silver, with a charm." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged but her mind racing. "She does, and Thomas Reed was terribly nervous about that sketchbook. He knows something, Inspector, though I don't believe he's our killer. His fear is that of a witness, not a culprit." She paused, her gaze returning to the canvas of Elise. "But someone in this village took that sketch, and I suspect Julian Haverford died to keep their secret." Craddock rubbed his chin, his eyes scanning the studio. "We're checking into the sketch's value. There's an art dealer in the next town, Grayson, who's known to handle Haverford's work. I'll have him questioned. As for the suspects, Clara's alibi holds for now. Her maid confirms she was home by 7:30. Ashby's groundskeeper says he was back at the manor by 7, but I'm not convinced. Elise claims she left at 8 and Thomas at 9. But no one saw them go." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, a gesture that hid her racing thoughts. "Timings are so slippery, aren't they? Like threads that won't stay knotted. I think we must look closer at what was taken and why. A sketch is a small thing, but in the right hands, it's a fortune, or a scandal." She thought of a St. Mary Mead, vicar's wife, who had hidden a compromising letter to protect her reputation, only to have it discovered in a church pew. Secrets, she knew, were the currency of murder. As they left the studio, the sun was climbing higher, burning away the last of the mist. Miss Marple paused by the fountain, her fingers brushing its edge once more. The scratches were a clue, a whisper of the truth, and she felt the puzzle beginning to take shape. Elise's bracelet, Thomas's fear, the missing sketchel were pieces, but the picture was not yet clear. Her next move would be to press Elise further, to test the cracks in her polished facade, and to learn more about the art dealer who might hold the key to the stolen page. She walked back to the village, her umbrella a steady companion, her mind weaving the studio's secrets into the tapestry of Julian Haverford's death. The fountain had spoken, and Miss Marple was listening, ready to unravel the truth stitch by careful stitch. Chapter 8. The model's musk. The village of St. Mary Mead was settling into the quiet rhythm of late afternoon, its lanes bathed in the golden light of an autumn sun that hung low and heavy. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage parlour, the fire crackling softly, her knitting needles poised but idle as she awaited her guest. She had invited Elise Vane for tea, a pretext as delicate as the lace doilies on her table, but one designed to probe the model's polished exterior. Elise, with her auburn hair and practiced poise, was a figure of fascination in the village. Her role as Julian Haverford's muse, fueling whispers of scandal. Miss Marple, ever attuned to the undercurrents of human nature, sensed that Elise's charm concealed more than it revealed, and she intended to find the truth beneath the mask. The knock at the door came promptly at 4, and Miss Marple rose. To greet her guest, Elise entered, her elegance a striking contrast to the parlour's cosy simplicity. She wore a deep green dress that complemented her eyes, and her silver bracelet gleamed at her wrist, its sharp-edged charm catching the light. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice smooth and warm, "how kind of you to invite me. I hope I'm not intruding." Her smile was radiant, but Miss Marple noted its careful construction, like a portrait painted to flatter. "Not at all, Miss Vane," Miss Marple replied, gesturing to a chintz-covered armchair. "It's a pleasure to have you. Please, make yourself comfortable. I've some fresh scones and a pot of Darjeeling." She bustled to the tea tray, her movements deft but unhurried, giving Elise time to settle. The model sat with the grace of one accustomed to being observed, her hands folded neatly, though Miss Marple caught the slight twitch of her fingers, as if resisting the urge to adjust her bracelet. They spoke of trifles at first: the villages, harvest festival, the chill in the air, the beauty of Haverford's paintings. Miss Marple's questions were gentle, her tone that of a kindly aunt, but her eyes were sharp, watching Elise's every gesture. "You must miss working with Mr. Haverford," she said, pouring tea with a steady hand. "His Muses series was quite extraordinary. I saw one of the canvases in the studio, so vivid, so alive. You were his inspiration, weren't you?" Elise's smile softened, a flicker of pride breaking through her composure. "Julian said I was," she replied, accepting a cup. "He saw something in me, a story, he called it. Every sitting was like a conversation, his brush telling it stroke by stroke." Her voice held a note of reverence, but Miss Marple detected a practiced quality, as if Elise had rehearsed her grief. She thought of a St. Mary Mead actress, Miss Clara Bell, who had charmed the village with her performances, but was caught selling forged tickets to fund a lavish wardrobe. Charm, Miss Marple knew, could be a dangerous currency. It must have been a special bond. Miss Marple said, her voice warm but probing. "Spending so many hours in the studio, just the two of you. I imagine it could feel quite intimate." She let the word linger, her eyes meeting Elise's over the rim of her teacup. Searching for a reaction, Elise's smile tightened, a barely perceptible shift. "It was professional," she said, her tone firm but smooth. "Julian was an artist, completely absorbed in his work. I was there to pose, nothing more." She sipped her tea, her fingers brushing the bracelet, and Miss Marple noted the gesture, recalling the scratches on the fountain's marble edge. Could that small, sharp charm have left its mark in a moment of violence? "Of course," Miss Marple said, her expression unchanged. "Though villagers do talk, don't they? I heard whispers about you and Mr. Haverford, but I never give much credence to gossip. Still, it must be trying, being the subject of such attention." Her words were a gentle trap, designed to unsettle without accusing. Elise's laugh was light, but it rang hollow. "Villagers thrive on stories," she said, setting her cup down. "People see a model and an artist and imagine all sorts of nonsense. Clara, his wife, never believed it. She was always kind to me." Her eyes flickered to the window, where the fading light cast shadows across the garden, and Miss Marple saw a fleeting shadow in her expression: fear, perhaps, or calculation. "I'm sure she was," Miss Marple said, offering a scone. "You were at the studio that last evening, weren't you? Until 8, I believe you said. It must be painful to think of what happened after you left." Her tone was sympathetic, but her question was a needle, probing for a crack in Elise's composure. Elise nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. "It is. Julian was at his easel, sketching me for a new piece. He was full of energy, talking about his next exhibition. I left him there, the fountain running softly in the background. I walked home to Rose Cottage alone, as I told the inspector. Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught the slight hesitation, the way her fingers tightened on the bracelet, as if anchoring her to her story. Alone, Miss Marple repeated, her tone thoughtful. It's a quiet path to the cottage, isn't it? No one to see you coming or going. I suppose the studio was quiet too, after you left. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes kind but unyielding, like a grandmother who knows a child is hiding. A broken vase, Elise's smile faltered, a crack in her polished mask. It was just Julian and his work. Thomas was there, tidying up, but he kept to himself. She paused, her fingers brushing the bracelet again, and Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the silver charm, its edges catching the firelight. I didn't see anything unusual, Elise added, her voice a shade too bright. I wish I had. Maybe I could have. She trailed off, her eyes glistening with what might have been tears or a performance. Miss Marple's mind turned to the sketchbook, its torn page a silent accusation. Julian's sketches are so valuable, aren't they? She said, her tone conversational. I saw one in the studio, near the fountain. Beautiful work, but a page was missing. It made me wonder if someone might have taken it, a collector, perhaps, or someone in need of money. She watched Elise closely, noting the sudden stillness in her posture, the way her hand froze on her cup. I wouldn't know, Elise said quickly, her smile returning but strained. Julian was careless with his sketchbooks. He'd tear pages out if he didn't like them, or give them away. It's probably nothing. Her words were smooth, but Miss Marple saw the flicker of alarm in her eyes, the way her bracelet jangled as she reached for a scone. Oh, I'm sure, Miss Marple said, her voice as gentle as ever. It's just that a missing sketch could be worth a great deal. I knew a young woman in St. Mary Mead, a governess, who took a silver locket from her employer, thinking it would solve her troubles. She meant no harm, but secrets have a way of catching up. She paused, letting the story settle, her eyes never leaving Elise's face. Elise's composure wavered, her hand trembling as she set the scone down untouched. I don't know anything about a missing sketch, she said, her voice tight. I was just his model. I posed. I left. That's all. She rose abruptly, smoothing her dress. I should go, Miss Marple. Thank you for the tea. It was kind of you. Miss Marple stood, her smile unwavering. Of course, my dear, do take care. These are troubling times. As Elise moved to the door, Miss Marple's eyes fell again on the bracelet, its charm glinting like a tiny blade. Such a pretty bracelet, she remarked, almost absently. So delicate, yet so distinctive. Elise's hand flew to her wrist, covering the bracelet as if it burned. A gift, she said, her voice clipped, from a friend. She hurried out, the door closing softly behind her, leaving a silence that seemed to echo with unspoken truths. Miss Marple returned to her chair, her knitting needles resuming their quiet rhythm. Elise Vane was a study in control, her beauty a shield, her words a carefully crafted narrative. Yet the cracks were there, the trembling hand, the guarded eyes, the bracelet that might have left its mark on a marble fountain. Miss Marple thought of the torn sketchbook, the scratches, the chaos of the studio. Elise's story was plausible, but plausibility was not truth, and Miss Marple suspected the model's secret was tied to that missing page. She sipped her tea, her mind weaving the threads of the mystery. Elise's ambition, her need for money, her presence in the studio all pointed to a motive, but murder required more than greed. Had Haverford caught her stealing, sparking a desperate struggle? Or was there another layer, a deeper betrayal? Miss Marple's next step would be to learn more about the sketch's value. Perhaps through the art dealer Craddock had mentioned. For now, she sat by the fire, the village outside settling into dusk, her thoughts as sharp as the needles in her hands, ready to unravel the mask of Ali's vein. Chapter 9. The patron's Alabitha late afternoon light draped St. Mary Mead in a soft amber glow. The villages, cottages, and lanes exuding a deceptive calm that belied the shadow of murder hanging over it. Miss Jane Marple sat in the back of Inspector Craddock's car, her umbrella resting across her knees, her eyes fixed on the passing hedgerows as they drove toward Ashby Hall. The manor's imposing silhouette loomed ahead, its stone walls a testament to wealth and power, but also, Miss Marple suspected, two secrets guarded with fierce pride. Lord Reginald Ashby, Julian Haverford's patron, had been at the studio the evening of the murder, and Craddock's latest findings had cast doubt on his account. Miss Marple, with her knack for seeing through the facades of the powerful, was eager to test his story. Craddock glanced at her from the driver's seat, his face taut with the strain of a case growing thornier by the day. "We've got something new, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. "Ashby told us he left the studio at 6:30, back at the manor by 7. But a groundskeeper saw his car near the studio, closer to 7, maybe later. He's sticking to his story, but it's wobbling. I thought you might shake something loose." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. "People do cling to their stories, don't they, Inspector? Like a child, with a favourite toy, even when it's broken. I'll be gentle, but thorough." She thought of a St. Mary Mead magistrate, Mr. Harrow, who had sworn he was at a parish meeting when his barn was set ablaze, only to be undone by a neighbour's glimpse of his coat in the moonlight. Alibis, she knew, were only as strong as the eyes that saw them. Ashby Hall's grand doors opened to reveal the same stooped butler, his expression as unyielding as the marble floor beneath his feet. He led them through the echoing hall, past the stern portraits and the ticking grandfather clock, to the drawing-room where Lord Ashby waited. The room was as Miss Marple remembered, opulent, with Haverford's paintings dominating the walls, their vibrant hues a stark contrast to the sombre mood. Ashby stood by the fireplace, his florid face set in a mask of impatience, his walking stick tapping the hearth as if marking time. "Miss Marple, Inspector," he greeted, his voice booming, but edged with irritation. "Ascendancy's a fine thing, but I'm a busy man. What's this about?" He gestured to a pair of armchairs, his moustache bristling as he sat heavily in his own, the crimson upholstery creaking under his weight. Miss Marple settled into her seat, her knitting bag at her side, her demeanour as serene as a village pond. "Thank you for seeing us again, Lord Ashby," she said, her voice soft but precise. "We're simply trying to clarify a few details about poor Mr. Haverford's death. It's such a troubling matter, and your help is invaluable." Her words were courteous, but her eyes were sharp, noting the slight twitch in Ashby's jaw, the way his hand tightened on his stick. Craddock took the lead, his tone professional but firm. "Lord Ashby, you stated you left the studio at 6:30 on the evening of Mr. Haverford's death. Yet a witness places your car near the studio, closer to 7, perhaps later. Can you explain the discrepancy?" Ashby's face reddened, his eyes narrowing. "A mistake," he blustered, his voice a shade too loud. "I left at 6:30, as I said, The groundskeeper must be confused. Poor light, you know, and he's not the sharpest. I was back here by 7, as my wife can confirm." He leaned forward, his moustache quivering with indignation. "I'm not accustomed to having my word questioned, Inspector." Miss Marple's expression remained gentle, but her mind was racing, cataloguing his defensiveness, the quickness of his denial. She thought of a St. Mary Mead counsellor, Mr. Brandt, who had sworn he was home during a village theft, only to be betrayed by a muddy bootprint outside the shop. "Of course, Lord Ashby," she said, her tone soothing. "It's only that timing is so crucial in these matters. You were at the studio to discuss your commissions, I believe. It must have been frustrating with Mr. Haverford so delayed." Ashby snorted, his hand slamming the arm of his chair. Frustrating, the man was. Infuriating. I poured thousands into that studio, expecting results. 3 portraits, promised by Christmas, and he was off sketching that vain girl instead. I went to give him a piece of my mind, 6 o'clock, as I said. Found him fawning over her brush. In hand, I told him to get on with my work or face consequences. Left by 6:30, no later. His voice was a growl, but Miss Marple noted the sweat beating on his brow, the way his eyes flicked to the portrait on the wall, a half-finished study of a regal woman. Its canvas, a silent reproach. "Consequences," Miss Marple repeated softly, her hands folded in her lap. A strong word. "I imagine a man of your position feels such delays keenly. I knew a landowner in St. Mary Mead, Mr. Grayson, who withdrew his support from a local choir when they ignored his choice of hymns. Pride can be a powerful force, can't it?" Her question was delicate, but it landed like a pebble in still water, rippling through Ashby's composure. He shifted, his walking stick tapping faster. "Pride. It's about respect, Miss Marple. I gave Haverford everything: studio, supplies, connections, and he treated me like a nuisance. But I didn't kill him. I was home, as I said. Ask Lady Ashby, tell you." His voice was firm, but Miss Marple caught the slight waver, the way his eyes avoided Craddock's steady gaze. Craddock leaned forward, his notebook open. "Lady Ashby did confirm you were home by 7, but her statement was vague. She mentioned you were in your study, not with her. No one else saw you until dinner at 8. That leaves a gap, Lord Ashby." His tone was calm, but the implication was clear, and Miss Marple watched Ashby's reaction closely, noting the clench of his jaw, the way his fingers whitened on his stick. "A gap," Ashby snapped. "This is absurd. I'm a busy man, not some skulking criminal. I was here, working. Haverford's death is a tragedy, but I had no hand in it." He stood, his bulk filling the room, and gestured toward the door. "I've answered your questions. If there's nothing else, I have matters to attend to." Miss Marple rose, her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes lingering on a small framed sketch by the widower Minor Haverford. A study of a horse, its lines sharp and confident. "Such a lovely piece," she said, almost to herself. "Mr. Haverford's sketches are so sought after, aren't they? I heard one was missing from a sketchbook in the studio. A valuable thing, a single page." She turned to Ashby, her expression innocent but her gaze piercing. "You collect his sketches, don't you? Did you ever receive one that night?" Ashby's face darkened, his moustache bristling. "Sketches. I've a few gifts from Haverford. But that night, no, nothing. He was too busy with his precious muse to bother with me." His tone was bitter, and Miss Marple noted the edge in it, the resentment that simmered beneath his pride. She thought of the torn sketchbook, the scratches on the fountain, the chaos. Of the studio, could Ashby's wounded pride have turned violent? Or was his anger merely a mask for something else? Greed, perhaps, for a sketch's value. Craddock closed his notebook, his eyes never leaving Ashby. "We'll verify your movements. Lord Ashby, if you remember anyone you saw, anything unusual, let us know. It could help us find the truth." His words were polite, but they carried a warning, and Ashby's scowl deepened as he nodded curtly as they left the manor. The evening air was sharp, the sky streaked with crimson. Miss Marple paused by the gates, her umbrella tapping the ground, her mind sifting through Ashby's words. His alibi was shaky, his pride a towering wall, but walls could hide cracks. She thought of the groundskeepers citing the gap in time, the sketchbook's missing page. Ashby's wealth gave him motive. Haverford's delays could have threatened his investments, and a stolen sketch could have been a quick profit. Yet drowning seemed too personal, too desperate, for a man of his stature. Or was it? "His temper's a problem," Craddock said as they drove back to the village. "But murder, I'm not sure. He's got the strength, but the motive feels..." "Finn." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts elsewhere. "Pride can be a motive, Inspector, when it's wounded deeply enough. But I'm more curious about that sketch. If Ashby didn't take it, someone did, and Haverford paid the price." She thought of a St. Mary mead merchant, whose pride led him to sabotage a rival's shop, only to be undone by a single receipt. Small things, she knew, could unravel great secrets. Her next step would be to press Thomas Reed, whose nervous loyalty might hold the key to the studio's final moments. For now, she gazed out at the darkening village, her mind weaving Ashby's shaky alibi into the tapestry of Julian Haverford's murder, ready to pull the thread that would unravel it all. Chapter 10. The assistant's confession. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a gossamer veil, softening the outlines of the villages, cottages, and lending an air of secrecy to the lanes. Miss Jane Marple walked purposefully toward Julian. Haverford's studio, her umbrella tapping a steady rhythm on the damp path, her mind as sharp as the autumn chill. The converted barn loomed ahead, its glass roof dulled by the mist, the fountain within a silent sentinel of the murder that had shaken the village. Today she sought Thomas Reed, the painter's assistant, whose nervous demeanor and furtive glances had lingered in her thoughts like an unfinished stitch. Loyalty, she knew, could bind a man to silence, but fear could unravel it, and Miss Marple intended to test the strength of Thomas's threads. Inspector Craddock had agreed to meet her at the studio, his voice on the telephone carrying a note of cautious optimism. "Thomas is there, sorting through Haverford's supplies again," he'd said. "He's jumpy as ever, but I think he's close to breaking. Your way with people, Miss Marple, it might just tip him over." She had smiled at that, her mind already turning to the young man's trembling hands, his eyes that darted to the sketchbook as if it held a secret too heavy to bear. She recalled a St. Mary Mead baker's apprentice, young Willie Stokes, who had hidden a theft of flour to protect his master's reputation, only to confess when pressed gently but firmly. Thomas, she suspected, was cut from similar cloth. The studio door creaked as she entered, the air inside cool and heavy with the scent of turpentine and damp marble. The fountain stood still, its shallow basin reflecting the muted light from the glass roof, the scratches on its edge a quiet accusation. Easels were scattered about, some draped with cloths, others bearing canvases frozen in mid-creation. Thomas Reed was near the back, kneeling beside a crate of brushes, his thin frame hunched, his straw-coloured hair falling into his eyes. He looked up as Miss Marple approached, his face pulling, a brush slipping from his fingers to clatter on the stone floor. "Miss Marple," he stammered, scrambling to his feet, his hands twisting a paint-stained rag. "I didn't expect you again. I'm just keeping things in order, you know, for Mr. Haverford." His voice was high, brittle, and Miss Marple noted the sweat on his brow, the way his eyes flicked toward the stack of sketchbooks on a nearby table. "How diligent you are, Mr. Reed," she said, her voice warm as a summer afternoon, settling onto a stool near the fountain. "It's a comfort to know Mr. Haverford's work is in such careful hands. It must be a heavy responsibility, looking after his legacy." Her words were kind, but her gaze was steady, searching for the crack in his nervous facade. Thomas swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "It is," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He was a genius. I owe him everything." His eyes drifted to the easel in the corner, where his own clumsy landscape sketch leaned, a pale imitation of Haverford's mastery. "I just want to do right by him." Miss Marple nodded, her hands folded in her lap, her knitting bag resting at her feet. "Of course you do," she said. "Loyalty is a rare thing, Mr. Reed. I knew a young man in St. Mary Mead, a gardener's lad, who stayed silent about a theft to protect his employer. But silence can weigh heavily, can't it? Especially when it hides something important." She paused, letting the words settle, her eyes never leaving his face. Thomas's hands trembled, the rag twisting into a tight coil. "I don't know what you mean," he said, but his voice cracked, and he stepped back, as if the fountain itself might accuse him. Miss Marple saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear she'd seen in a St. Mary Mead Choy boy who'd hidden a stolen collection plate. His guilt betrayed by his inability to meet her gaze. "You were here late that night, weren't you?" she asked gently, her tone that of a grandmother soothing a troubled child. "Until 9, you said, tidying up. But I wonder if you stayed a bit longer, or saw something you haven't mentioned. The studio holds so many secrets, doesn't it? Like that sketchbook with its missing page." She gestured to the table where the leather-bound book lay, its torn edge a silent question. Thomas's face drained of colour, his eyes darting to the sketchbook, then back to the floor. "I told you, Mr. Haverford tore pages out all the time," he said, his words tumbling over each other. "It's nothing. I didn't see anything. I left him alive, I swear." His voice rose, a desperate edge to it, and Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her expression unchanged but her mind racing. "I believe you, Mr. Reed," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But I think you saw something, or know something. That frightens you. Perhaps it's about that missing sketch. It's a small thing, but small things can matter greatly. I once knew a girl in St. Mary Mead who took a single ribbon from a shop, thinking it harmless, but it led to her downfall. When she was caught. If you know something, it's better to share it now, before the truth finds its own way out." Thomas's shoulders slumped, his rag falling to the floor as he sank onto a crate, his hands covering his face. "I didn't kill him," he whispered, his voice muffled. "I couldn't. He was like a father to me." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, and Miss Marple saw the anguish in them, the weight of a secret too heavy to carry alone. "Then tell me what happened," she said, her tone as gentle as a lullaby. "You were here, tidying up. What did you see?" Thomas hesitated, his breath ragged. Then the words spilled out like water from a broken dam. "I stayed later than I said," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Past 9, maybe 10. Juno was sketching, and Miss Vane was there until 8. She left, but she came back around 9:30. I was in the back, cleaning brushes. I saw her take something, a folder, or a paper from the table near the fountain. Mr. Haversford didn't notice, he was painting. She saw me watching, and hurried out. I didn't say anything. I thought it was nothing." He paused, his hands shaking. "Then I heard a noise, a splash, a shout. I ran to the fountain, but he was already dead, face down in the water. I panicked. I ran home. I didn't tell anyone." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. "You didn't tell the police about Elise?" she asked, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. Thomas shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "I was scared. She's important, famous because of his paintings. I'm nobody who'd believe me. And I didn't see her do it, I swear. I just saw her take something, and then he was dead." His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. Miss Marple leaned forward, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You did what you thought was right, Mr. Reed, but the truth matters, and you've done the right thing now." She paused, her mind turning to Elise, the silver bracelet, the torn sketchbook. "The folder, did you see what was in it?" "No," Thomas said, looking up, his face ashen. "It was dark, and I was far away. It looked like papers, maybe sketches. I checked the sketchbook later, hid it to protect it. I saw the torn page, but I didn't know what it meant. I thought maybe she took it, but I wasn't sure." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts aligning like threads in a pattern. Elise's return, the missing sketch, the scratches on the fountain, pieces of a puzzle falling into place. She recalled a St. Mary Mead maid who had stolen a letter to protect a secret, only to be caught when the letter surfaced in a pawn shop. "You've been very brave, Mr. Reed," she said, rising. "Inspector Craddock will need to hear this, but I'll speak. To him, you've done your part." As she left the studio, the mist was lifting, revealing the stark lines of the fields beyond. Thomas's confession had shifted the tapestry, pointing to Elise Vane's hidden actions. Miss Marple's next step was clear: to confront the art dealer, to trace the missing sketch, and to test Elise's story against the weight of the truth. Her umbrella tapped the path as she walked, her mind weaving the threads of Thomas's fear, Elise's secrecy, and the fountain's silent testimony, into the pattern of Julian Haverford's murder. Chapter 11. The torn page. The village of St. Mary Mead lay quiet under a pale autumn sky, its lanes winding past cottages where lamplight glowed against the encroaching dusk. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, the fire casting a warm flicker. Across her knitting, which lay untouched in her lap, her mind was far from idle, weaving together the threads of Julian Haverford's murder with the precision of a needle through fine cloth. Thomas Reed's confession had shifted the pattern, pointing to Elise Vane's furtive return to the studio and the mysterious folder she had taken. The torn sketchbook, the scratches on the fountain, and now Thomas's account of Elise's actions, formed a picture, but it was incomplete, like a canvas missing its final strokes. Miss Marple knew the truth lay in the details, and today she intended to pursue one. The missing sketch. Inspector Craddock had mentioned an art dealer, Mr. Grayson, in the nearby town of Much Benham, known to handle Haverford's work. Miss Marple had arranged to visit him, under the guise of inquiring about a painting for the church bazaar, a pretext as delicate as her laced shawl. She suspected the missing sketch had found its way to Grayson's shop, and if so, it might reveal the motive behind Haverford's death. She recalled a St. Mary Mead grocer, Mr. Tuttle, who had bought stolen goods, thinking them legitimate, only to be caught when a monogrammed locket betrayed its origins. Small transactions, she knew, could unravel great crimes. The train, too much. Benham was a short journey, and Miss Marple, seated by the window with her umbrella propped beside her, watched the countryside roll past fields of stubble, hedgerows heavy with late berries. The town was busier than St. Mary Mead, its high street bustling with shoppers, but Grayson's shop was tucked down a narrow alley. Its sign faded but elegant, Grayson and Sons, Fine Art and Antiques. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, the air thick with the scent of old wood and varnish. Mr. Grayson was a wiry man in his 50s, with sharp eyes and a smile that hovered between charm and calculation. His shop was a labyrinth of paintings, sculptures, and gilt-framed mirrors, with Haverford's work prominently displayed, a landscape here, a portrait there, each glowing with the artist's unmistakable touch. "Miss Marple," he greeted, wiping his hands on a cloth as he emerged from behind a counter cluttered with catalogues. "A pleasure. I understand you're interested in a piece for your village bazaar." Miss Marple smiled, her demeanour as unassuming as her sensible hat. "Indeed, Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice warm but precise. "St. Mary Mead is always looking for something special to raise funds. I've heard you handle Mr. Haverford's work, and his paintings are so admired. Perhaps a small piece, or even a sketch." Her eyes swept the shop, lingering on a stack of drawings in a corner, their edges curling slightly. Grayson's smile tightened, a flicker of wariness crossing his face. "Haverford's work is in high demand, especially now," he said, leading her toward a display of landscapes. "His death has sent prices soaring. Sketches, though they're rare, he was particular about them, kept most locked away." He paused, his fingers brushing a frame as if to steady himself. "What sort of piece did you have in mind?" Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of innocent curiosity. "Oh, something modest," she said. "I saw a sketchbook in his studio, you know, with such lovely drawings of Miss Vane. One page was torn out, which seemed a pity. I wondered if it might have found its way here. Sketches can be so valuable, can't they?" Her words were light, but they landed like a carefully aimed dart, and she watched Grayson's reaction closely. His eyes narrowed, and he busied himself adjusting a painting, avoiding her gaze. "Torn page. I wouldn't know about that," he said, his voice smooth but strained. "Haverford's sketches do come my way now and then, but I only deal in legitimate pieces. Collectors pay well, but I'm careful about provenance." He gestured to a small drawing on the wall, a study of a woman's hand, signed by Haverford. "This came from Lord Ashby's collection, for example, perfectly above board." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes lingering on the drawing, noting its careful lines, so like those in the studio sketchbook. "Of course," she said, "though I heard a rumour village gossip, you know that a sketch was sold recently, perhaps. One of Miss Vane. It would be such a treasure for the right buyer." She paused, her tone as gentle as a breeze, but her gaze was sharp. Catching the sudden stiffness in Grayson's posture, he coughed, his smile faltering. "A sketch of Miss Vane. Well, I may have acquired one recently," he admitted, his voice cautious. "She brought it to me herself, a few days ago. Said it was a gift from Haverford, given before his death. A fine piece, very fine. I sold it to a London collector good price, too. He tried to sound casual, but Miss Marple saw the sweat on his brow, the way his fingers twitched as he adjusted his glasses. A gift, she repeated, her voice thoughtful. How generous of Mr. Haverford, and you didn't think it odd so soon after his death. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes kind but unyielding, like a grandmother who knows a child has. Raided the biscuit tin. Grayson shifted, his eyes darting to the door as if hoping for rescue. Not at all, he said quickly. Miss Vane was his muse, after all. It's not unusual for an artist to gift a sketch to a model. I checked the signature Haverford's, no question. Everything was in order, but his voice betrayed him, a slight tremor revealing his unease, and Miss Marple thought of a St. Mary Mead pawnbroker who had bought a stolen watch, only to falter when questioned about its origins. I'm sure it was, she said, her smile unwavering. Though it's curious, isn't it, that a page was torn from a sketchbook found near the fountain where Mr. Haverford died. The police are quite interested in it. A sketch like that could be worth a great deal or cause a great deal of trouble. She let the words hang, watching as Grayson's face paled, his hand gripping the counter. I don't know anything about a torn page, he said, his voice rising. Miss Vane brought me the sketch, said it was hers to sell. I had no reason to doubt her. But his eyes betrayed him, flickering with the fear of a man caught in a lie, and Miss Marple knew she had struck a nerve. She rose, smoothing her skirt, her demeanour as serene as ever. You've been very helpful, Mr. Grayson, she said. I'll let Inspector Craddock know about the sketch. He may wish to speak with you himself. She paused at the door, her umbrella tapping the floor. It's a pity, isn't it, how small things can lead to such consequences. I knew a shopkeeper once who bought a stolen necklace, thinking it harmless. It cost him his reputation when the truth came out. Grayson's mouth opened, then closed, his protest dying unspoken. Miss Marple stepped into the alley, the bell jingling behind her, her mind racing with the new piece of the puzzle. Elise had sold a sketch, claiming it was a gift. But Thomas's confession placed her at the studio after hours, taking something in haste. The torn page, the scratches on the fountain, the bracelet's sharp charmal pointed to a struggle, a theft gone wrong. Miss Marple thought of a St. Mary Mead seamstress who had taken a bolt of silk, only to be caught when a thread was found. In her hem, evidence, she knew, was often in the smallest details. As she boarded the train back to St. Mary Mead, the countryside blurring past, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Elise. The model's beauty was her shield, but it was cracking, and the truth was seeping through. The sketch was the key, a motive for murder wrapped in a single sheet of paper. Miss Marple's next move would be to confront Elise with Grayson's revelation, to press her until the mask fell away. For now, she sat quietly, her umbrella at her side, her mind weaving the threads of the torn page into the tapestry of Julian Haverford's death, ready to pull the final stitch that would reveal the killer. Chapter 12. The final brushstroke youth. Dusk settled over St. Mary Mead, like a soft grey shawl, the villagers' cottages glowing faintly with lamplight as the autumn chill deepened. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, the fire casting a warm flicker. Across the walls, her knitting needles silent in their basket. The threads of Julian Haverford's murder had woven themselves into a nearly complete tapestry in her mind. Each stitch Thomas's confession, Elise's stolen sketch, the scratches. on the fountain pointing to a truth as clear as the village church bell. Tonight, she would meet Inspector Craddock at the police station to share her findings. But first, she had requested one final conversation with Elise Vane, whose polished facade had begun to crack under the weight of evidence. The station was a small, sturdy building on the edge of the village, its windows bright against the gathering dark. Craddock greeted Miss Marple at the door, his face a mix of weariness and anticipation. "You've got something, haven't you?" he said, leading her to a sparse office where Elise waited, her auburn hair catching the light, her green eyes wary. She sat rigidly, her silver bracelet glinting at her wrist, its sharp-edged charm a silent accusation. Miss Vane agreed to come in, Craddock added, his voice low. "She's nervous, but holding to her story. I hope you can shake it loose." Miss Marple nodded, settling into a chair across from Elise, her demeanor as serene as a Sunday morning. "Thank you for coming, Miss Vane," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It's a troubling time, and we're so close to understanding what happened to poor Mr. Haverford. I think you can help us." Her eyes met Elise's kind but unyielding, like a grandmother who knows the truth behind a child's fib. Elise's smile was tight, her hands clasped in her lap. "I've told you everything, Miss Marple," she said, her voice smooth but strained. "I was at the studio until 8, then went home. I don't know what happened after that." Her fingers brushed the bracelet, a nervous habit Miss Marple had noted before, and she thought of the scratches on the fountain's marble edge, so small yet so telling. Craddock leaned against the desk, his notebook open. "We've new information, Miss Vane," he said, his tone measured. "Thomas Reed saw you return to the studio around 9:30 after you claimed to have left. He saw you take something, a folder or paper near the fountain. And Mr. Grayson, the art dealer, confirmed you sold him a Haverford sketch, saying it was a gift, but a sketchbook in the studio had a page torn out. Care to explain?" Elise's face paled, her eyes widening for a moment before she regained her composure. "Thomas must be mistaken," she said, her voice steady but thin. "I didn't go back. And the sketch, I told Mr. Grayson it was a gift from Julian. He gave it to me weeks ago. There's no crime in selling a gift." Her words were defiant, but Miss Marple saw the tremor in her hands, the way her bracelet jangled as she spoke. Miss Marple leaned forward, her hands folded neatly. "It's curious though, isn't it?" she said, her tone as gentle as a lullaby. "A torn page, a sketch sold so soon after Mr. Haverford's death, and those scratches on the fountains, small but sharp, like the charm on your bracelet. I knew a girl in St. Mary Mead, a seamstress, who took a bolt of silk, thinking it would solve her troubles. She didn't mean harm, but when her employer caught her, she panicked. Things can happen in a moment of fear, can't they?" Her words were a soft probe, designed to pierce Elise's defenses. Elise's composure cracked, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I didn't mean to hurt him," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I needed money, my family, they're in debt. Julian's sketches were worth a fortune, and I thought, just one, no one would miss it. I went back that night, after Thomas thought I'd left. I took a sketch from the book, but Julian saw me. He was furious, grabbed my arm. She touched her bracelet, her fingers trembling. We struggled by the fountain. I pushed him, and he fell. His head hit the edge, and he went under. I didn't mean for him to die." Her voice dissolved into sobs, her hands covering her face. Craddock's eyes hardened, but he remained silent, letting Miss Marple guide the moment. "You panicked," she said softly, her tone free of judgment. "And you left him there, hoping it would look like an accident. But the sketchbook, the scratches, Thomas's witnessed they told the truth. Miss Vane, the truth always comes out." Elise nodded, her shoulders shaking. "I took the sketch to Grayson the next day. I thought if I sold it quickly, no one would know. I didn't want to hurt him. I just needed the money." Her voice was a whisper, her beauty a fragile shell now, broken by guilt. Craddock stepped forward, his voice firm but not unkind. "Elise Vane, you're under arrest for the manslaughter of Julian Haverford. We'll need a full statement." He signaled to a constable, who led Elise away, her sobs echoing in the small room. Miss Marple remained seated, her hands still folded, her eyes distant. She felt a pang of pity for Elise, whose ambition had led to ruin, much like a St. Mary Mead governess who had stolen a brooch to escape poverty, only to find herself trapped by her own actions. "Poor girl," she murmured. She thought a sketch would save her, but it cost her everything. Craddock closed his notebook, his face a mix of relief and exhaustion. "You did it again, Miss Marple," he said, a faint smile breaking through. "The bracelet, the sketch, Thomas's story, you saw it all. I'd have missed it." Miss Marple shook her head, her smile gentle. "It's only a matter of listening, Inspector. People tell their stories, even when they don't mean to. The fountain, the torn page, a nervous glance, they all speak, if you know how to hear." She rose, gathering her umbrella, her thoughts already turning to her cottage, where her knitting awaited. As they stepped into the night, the village was quiet, the stars sharp above the rooftops. Miss Marple walked home, her umbrella tapping the path, her mind at peace. The tapestry of Julian Haverford's murder was complete, its final brushstroke painted in Elise's tears. The fountain's secret was revealed, and St. Mary Mead could rest, though its whispers would linger, as they always did, in the shadows of human nature.